Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome back to our Lunch and Learn, where we're going to talk about grief of losing a pet with our title, More Than a Pet, Recognizing and Supporting Grief in Pet Loss. We're very happy to have you here today, and welcome back to those who were here last week. We hope this conversation, this presentation can be a springboard for future conversations around grief due to pet loss, because it really is a type of loss that is not talked about as much as it should be, and at the same time, I think arguably carries a degree of pain almost similar to losing a human life, if not more at times. So I will be providing our presentation, and then towards the end, I can open it up to questions, comments, anything you'd like. If you'd like to put your questions in the chat box throughout, just so we can keep a running list, that's absolutely fine. Or if you prefer to wait towards the end of the presentation to ask your question or make your comment, that's fine as well. But again, welcome, and let's get started. So my name is Dr. Dan Sheridan. I am the clinical and training advisor for the CBC. Formerly, I was the clinical director and moved to a clinical and training advisory role. And in my current full-time job, I am a licensed psychologist in private practice in Miami. So at the end of this presentation, we're going to be doing a very small memorial service, a way to honor your pet companion. So for those who've received the link to upload a picture of your pet, you'll be seeing your pet towards the end of the presentation, and it will be just a space for us to hold space and to honor the loved ones in our life, our pet loved ones who passed away. So let's get started. So as we begin, I want to start with something universal. All of us at some point in our lives will experience loss. It's part of being human. And for many of us, that loss is not only the death of a person, but the death of a pet. Pets often become so much more than animals in our homes. They're companions, confidants, and truly part of our families. They provide daily consistency, they greet us with excitement, they share our routines, and they offer comfort without judgment. For individuals who may feel marginalized, lonely, or unseen, a pet can even be their primary attachment figure, the one being who accepts them fully and unconditionally. Research shows that the human-animal bond activates the same attachment systems in our brains as human-to-human relationships. This helps explain why the grief after losing a pet can feel so profound. And yet, unlike human loss, the death of a pet often doesn't come with rituals or mourning. There may be no funeral, no bereavement leave, and little public acknowledgement. This disconnect can leave grieving pet owners feeling isolated, guilty, or even ashamed, as if their grief is somehow less legitimate. But studies confirm what many already know firsthand, that the intensity of grief from pet loss can mirror and sometimes exceed the grief we experience when a person dies. So as we move into today's session, I want to lay out our objectives so you have a clear sense of what we're going to talk about together. First, we'll explore the nature of grief in pet loss. So this means looking at the emotional, social, physical, and even spiritual dimensions of grief when the loss involves an animal. It's also important to emphasize here that this grief is real, it's valid, and often just as significant as human loss. Second, we'll work to understand disenfranchised grief. And this is a grief that isn't recognized or supported by others. In the context of pet loss, this often looks like friends, coworkers, or even family members minimizing the experience. So we'll discuss the challenges that this creates for grievers and why it can intensify their suffering. And finally, we'll learn about strategies to support children, teens, and adults through pet loss. We'll look at both informal supports, like what family members and friends can offer. We'll talk about formal supports, such as counseling, grief support groups, and rituals that help people feel seen and validated. And we're also going to practice approaches to discussing euthanasia with children, which is a really, really hard topic. So this is one of the hardest conversations a parent or caregiver may face. So we'll spend time thinking through language that's clear, that's compassionate, and most importantly, developmentally appropriate. We'll highlight how to ease fears, answer questions honestly, and prevent children from feeling guilt or blame, which can be very common. So by the end of this lunch and learn, you'll have a stronger framework, not only for understanding pet loss grief, but also for supporting others with empathy and practical strategies. So now let's go into the grief considerations for pet loss. So I want you all to think about this word, this big bold word on the screen, dead. And it's a word that none of us really like to use or think about. It's painful. And I want you to just think in your own space right now, what thoughts or emotional reactions come up for this word. It can entail finality, the end, sadness, discomfort. It could be so many things, and all of which are incredibly true and real, that it is not a pleasant word. It is not a pleasant experience, and something we want to create distance from and avoid. So if we don't say the word dead or died, we use all sorts of words to try to communicate this idea without being so bold and so in your face about it. So we may say words like passed away, um, no longer with us, transitioned. These are euphemisms. These are figures of speech that, as adults, we get it. We know what we're talking about, and it doesn't have that harsh feeling of the word dead or died. But however, we have to think about children and the way they process language and their own ability to understand euphemisms and abstract thinking. So for a young child, if we said we lost Scruffy, a pet's name, they might think they're actually lost. Well, let's go find them. When in fact, Scruffy has died. We also must find ourselves saying Scruffy needed to be put to sleep. They don't understand what we're talking about when we say that. They might think he is truly sleeping, so let's wake him up. What's the issue here? So these words can get very confusing. And if we're saying someone needs to be put to sleep, and that actually means they died, it could be a very scary situation for a child to go to sleep. If they go to sleep, are they going to die? If someone in their life goes to sleep, will they die? So, for the purpose of children's understanding about a very emotionally challenging situation for everyone, to say Scruffy died is really hard to say. It's not something we enjoy to saying, but it's a very important thing to say. It's honest, it's real, it's concrete, it's not confusing. So, as much as we're able to, when talking with children about death and dying, whether it's a pet or a human, we need to use very simple words so that we can all be on the same page and speak the same language. Now let's look at pets as attachment figures. So the first step in understanding grief due to pet loss is recognizing the depth of the human-animal bond. Pets can often serve as attachment figures for us. For children, they can be transitional attachments. They provide stability during big changes or stressful times. And for adults, they're life companions. They're sources of unconditional love and consistency. So, because of this, when a pet dies, the grief can feel like losing a partner, a child, or a best friend. It's never just an animal. Beyond attachment, pets shape our identities. People describe themselves as a dog mom or a cat dad, and these identities are tied to one's sense of self. So when a pet has died, it can feel like losing a part of who you are. Your own identity starts to become in question. Pets also structure our daily routines. We feed them, we walk them, we play with them. Our sleep schedule, our daily schedule revolves around a pet's needs. So when they die, when they're no longer here with us, this disrupts our rhythms, our natural rhythms that we built around these pets. So this disruption, the fact that there's no more taking Scruffy out on a walk, is a constant reminder of loss that can occur throughout the day. Finally, pets can play a powerful role in emotional regulation. They comfort us after a stressful day. They provide affection through touch, and they serve as a safe, non-judgmental presence. Many people share their worries with their pets, things they might never say to another person. A pet gets to hear. So losing that outlet can intensify grief and even exacerbate other mental health challenges that a person might be dealing with. So this deep, multifaceted bond explains why the loss of a pet carries such a profound impact. And just like with human loss, grief after pet loss is multidimensional. It's never just one thing. The most common emotional reaction is sadness and longing. This is a deep ache for their presence, who's no longer there with us. But grief is rarely just one emotion. Many people can also experience anger, and this anger might be directed at themselves for not preventing the death, at the veterinarian for not being able to save the pet, or at life itself for feeling unfair. Another very powerful and painful response is guilt. This shows up especially in the context of euthanasia, and people might ask themselves over and over, did I make the right choice? Did I act too soon? Did I wait too long? And it can be a very torturing experience for us. And then there's the complicated feeling of relief. If a pet's been suffering from a long illness, people may feel relieved that their pet is no longer in pain. But that relief can trigger guilt. If I loved them so much, why do I feel relief? It's important to remember that all of these emotions, sadness, anger, guilt, and even relief, are natural parts of grief. There's nothing wrong with these feelings, and they're normal. They don't cancel each other out. Instead, they reflect the depth of love and the complexity of loss. So, grief from pet loss isn't just emotional. It often shows up in our bodies and our social worlds as well. Physically, people may notice sleep difficulties, changes in appetite, or fatigue. These are common responses to grief in general. But with pet loss, there's an added dimension, the absence of physical touch. Stroking a pet's fur, being cuddled by them, or just feeling their presence at our side can all regulate our bodies and emotions. Without that contact, people may experience a deep sense of emptiness or even restlessness in their bodies. Socially, the impact can be equally profound. Pets are often a bridge to community. Think about dog parks, neighborhood walks, or casual conversations that happen because of a pet. When the pet is gone, people may suddenly feel isolated. And to make matters worse, friends or colleagues may not respond with the same support they would if a human family member had died. Instead of compassion, grievers may hear dismissive comments or no acknowledgement at all. Because of this, some individuals avoid talking about their grief altogether, fearing that it might be minimized or judged. So when we look at the physical and social aspects of pet loss, we see not just private sorrow, but also how grief ripples through daily life and connections with others. So, in addition to emotional, physical, and social reactions, many people also experience existential reactions to the loss of a pet. Grievers can often wrestle with spiritual or philosophical questions. Where do pets go after they die? Will I see them again? These are profound questions of meaning, and they don't always have easy answers. The death of a pet can also reopen broader reflections on mortality and meaning in life. For children, it may be their first real experience with death, raising questions about what it means for life to end. And for older adults, it may resurface their own fears or awareness of aging and loss. Pets can also carry powerful symbolic meaning. They often represent innocence and unconditional love, creatures who love us without judgment and who bring joy into our daily lives. When that is taken away, it can lead to deep questioning of why do innocent beings suffer and is life fair? These existential reactions remind us that grief is not only about missing the pet, but also about confronting some of life's biggest and hardest questions. While all pet loss can be deeply painful, some losses are experienced as traumatic, and they often carry additional layers of distress. Pet loss can become traumatic when it happens suddenly or unexpectedly. For example, through an accident, an acute illness, or an injury. It can also be traumatic if the person witnessed the death or suffering of their pet, or if the circumstances were violent or distressing, such as an attack or a natural disaster. Another very common factor is feeling responsible for the death, such as in cases of accidental injury or perceived delay medical care or difficulty in euthanasia decisions. This sense of responsibility can intensify the emotional pain and complicate the grieving process. Some common reactions to traumatic pet loss can look different from typical grief. People may experience intrusive images or flashbacks of their pet's final moments, intense guilt or self-blame, or become hypervigilant and anxious about their remaining pet's health and safety. And others may experience numbness emotionally or detachment as protective responses, or even avoid reminders like their pet's toys, their pet's bed, or photos. Sometimes these reactions develop into complicated grief, where the person feels stuck in shock or disbelief, and the pain does not ease over time. Recognizing the signs of traumatic pet loss helps us respond with extra sensitivity and lets grieving individuals know their experience is valid, understandable, and not something they have to carry alone. So now let's move to disenfranchised grief, which is such an important part of pet loss that can happen in various other forms as well. Disenfranchised grief is quite common, unfortunately. So for those unfamiliar with the term, disenfranchised grief refers to grief that society does not fully recognize, that society does not fully validate or support. Unlike the death of a human, where rituals like funerals or bereavement leave provide social acknowledgement, disenfranchised grief often leaves people grieving in silence. It occurs when a loss is not openly acknowledged, socially validated, or publicly mourned. Without that recognition, the grieving person can feel isolated or even ashamed of the intensity of their emotions. In the case of pet loss, this often shows up when others dismiss the grief with comments like, "It was just a pet," or encourage quick replacement with, "You can always get another one." While these words may be well intentioned, and often they are, they minimize the depth of the human animal bond and make it harder for people to express or process their grief. Understanding disenfranchised grief helps us recognize why pet loss can be so difficult, not only because of the loss itself, but because of the lack of societal validation that typically follows it. Disenfranchised grief around pet loss often shows up in subtle and painful ways. The most obvious is through dismissive comments, like I mentioned earlier, of "it was just a pet" or "you can always get another one." These statements try to rank grief, suggesting that the death of an animal is less significant than the death of a human. However, for the person grieving, the bond with their pet is deep, and these comments can feel invalidating or hurtful. Another way it appears is in the lack of formal rituals. So when a human dies, society provides built-in rituals. We have funerals, memorial services, bereavement leave, and these give space for grief. In contrast, pet loss typically comes without this structure. While some veterinary clinics may offer paw prints or sympathy cards, these are private gestures rather than shared communal acknowledgement. And finally, there's social minimization in workplaces, schools, and even families. Like I said, few places offer bereavement leave for pet loss, which means people are often forced to return to work as if nothing had happened. And it's a horrible feeling. Schools may not provide children with space or support to process the death of a pet, and expecting them to quickly move on. And even within families, there may be disagreements about the importance of a pet, leaving the grieving person feeling unseen or invalidated in their own home. So altogether, these factors compound the pain of pet loss by denying grievers the recognition and support that they need. So when grief is not acknowledged or validated, it carries real consequences for the person mourning the loss of a pet. First, there's often increased isolation and shame. If someone shares their grief and hears it was just a pet, they may withdraw and stop talking about it. Over time, they may even start to feel embarrassed or ashamed for feeling too much about their animal, which only compounds the pain. Second, grief can become suppressed. Without permission to mourn openly, emotions are often pushed down. But grief that is silenced does not go away. It often resurfaces later, sometimes in unexpected or more complicated forms. It can fester. Finally, this can lead to complicated grief reactions. When support is withheld, grief can last longer and feel more overwhelming. People may struggle with ongoing guilt, obsessive rumination over their pet's death, or unresolved anger. These barriers can interfere with healing and keep people stuck in their grief. So, in sum, disenfranchised grief doesn't just minimize pet loss in the moment, it can fundamentally shape how someone carries their grief over time. When grief is disenfranchised, one of the most important things we can do is actively counter that invalidation. So, the first step is validation. By simply acknowledging that the grief is real, it can be profoundly healing. Phrases like your grief matters because your relationship mattered reinforce that the human animal bond is deep and meaningful. By affirming this, we give grievers permission to feel what they are already experiencing. The second strategy is encouraging rituals. Because society doesn't always provide rituals for pet loss, we can help people create their own. A small memorial service at home, a scrapbook or memory box, an online tribute, or planting a tree in honor of the pet all provide structure and acknowledgement. These acts allow the grief to be expressed and shared rather than hidden. And finally, there's the broader role of advocacy. Workplaces could recognize pet loss by offering flexibility or even compassionate leave. Schools could provide space and counseling for children who've lost a pet instead of expecting them to just move on. And at the community level, simply normalizing conversations about pet grief helps create a culture where loss of a beloved animal is taken seriously. Together, these strategies help break down the silence and stigma around pet loss and provide the kind of support that makes healing possible. So let's now dive further into support strategies and how we can help someone who's grieving a pet. One of the most important strategies for supporting someone who's lost a pet is offering validation and empathy. Let's begin with the importance of avoiding minimizing language. Grievers often hear phrases like, it was just a pet, you can always get another one. While usually well-intentioned, they minimize the depth of the human-animal bond and can intensify feelings of isolation. Instead, we want to use language that honors the significance of the relationship. You can say statements like, I can see how much your pet's name meant to you, or losing a companion like that is incredibly painful. These kind of statements validate that this loss is real. The second key element is reflective listening. This means not just hearing the words, but reflecting them back in a way that shows genuine understanding. For example, if someone says, I feel so lost without her, you can respond by saying something like, it sounds like her presence gave your day structure, and now it feels empty without her. This kind of response communicates that you're truly present with the person's grief. You're really listening. And finally, we also don't want to underestimate the power of silence. Sometimes just sitting with someone in their pain without trying to fix it or without trying to offer solutions can really be one of the most validating and supportive gestures you can make. It's really hard to be with someone's pain, to be with someone when they're crying. So if we can hold space for them, you are really giving them a gift. Rituals are also one of the most powerful ways we process loss. As humans, we've always used rituals to create meaning out of grief, to bring closure, and to keep the memory of our loved ones alive. But because pet loss is often disenfranchised and lack formal rituals, like a funeral or memorial service, creating rituals becomes even more important. They help restore acknowledgement and honor to the bond we share with our pets. And there are many ways that we can do this that are meaningful. Some people write goodbye letters to their pets, where they express love, gratitude, or even things left unsaid. Others may plant trees or flowers as a living memorial that continues to grow in honor of their family, of their animal companion. And families may hold small memorial services, gathering together to share stories, to light a candle, and remember the joy their pet brought into their lives. Others create keepsakes, such as paw prints, photo albums, jewelry engraved with the pet's name, or digital slideshows. Finally, there are anniversary rituals, which can also be very healing. We can light a candle or share a memory on the pet's birthday, the day they were adopted, or the anniversary of their passing. These traditions give people an ongoing way to keep the memory alive and integrate the loss into the rhythm of their lives. It creates what we call a continuing bond. So, by encouraging and supporting rituals, we give grievers a way to honor their pet's life and ensure their bond is remembered with love. When someone loses a pet, one of the biggest challenges I mentioned earlier is the disruption of daily routines. Pets can give structure to our lives, feeding, walking, grooming, and when they're gone, that rhythm collapses. And this can leave people feeling unmoored, unattached, and constantly reminded of their absence. So by providing practical support, it can help ease that adjustment. And this might mean helping the grieving person reset their meal times and sleep schedules, or even offering to go on walks with them if walking alone feels too painful without their pet companion. And these simple acts of support can make a significant difference. Another important area is creating outlets for grief. Journaling can be a powerful way to record memories, express feelings, or even write from the pet's perspective as a way of staying connected. For others, art or storytelling offers healing. This can be drawing, painting, or creating stories that capture the essence of the bond. And some people find meaning in legacy projects, like compiling photo albums, videos, or poems that celebrate the pet's life. These activities don't just provide catharsis and relief, they also create tangible reminders of the relationship, helping people honor the bond and carry it forward. While friends and family can offer support, there's also valuable community and professional resources available for those grieving a pet as well. One option is grief groups. These provide a safe space where people can share their experiences with others who truly understand what they're going through. Being in a group can normalize grief and helps reduce feelings of isolation. Another option is pet loss hotlines and online communities. There are many universities and veterinarian schools that sponsor hotline staff that are trained volunteers. There are also online forums and social media groups that provide around the clock peer support, people who can listen and validate at any time of day or night. Another growing field is veterinary social work, where licensed social workers partner with veterinary practices, and they can offer emotional support to families facing euthanasia, chronic illness, or grief, and help navigate not only the medical, but also the ethical and emotional aspects of care. Finally, there are mental health professionals, such as grief counselors and therapists, who can provide more structured, ongoing support. This is especially important if grief becomes complicated, prolonged, or overlaps with other significant losses in a person's life. By connecting grievers to these community and professional resources, we give them a wider network of care, and we help ensure that they don't feel like they have to carry this grief on their own. So now I want to just cover a couple of common things you might hear or find yourself wanting to say that are well-intentioned and we all want to help, but it's not the best thing to say. It's not the most helpful thing to say. So I want to provide you some alternatives. So the one that keeps coming up today is it was just a pet. And as I said, this is a phrase that diminishes the relationship and can invalidate a person's grief. So instead, you could say something like, they were such an important part of your life. Another one I mentioned already today is you can always get another pet. And this can treat pets as replaceable and minimizes the unique bond. So what you can say instead is no other pet could ever replace them. Say the opposite. Another common thing that people say is, well, at least it wasn't a person. And the problem with this is that it compares grief and suggests theirs is less legitimate. An alternative thing you can say is grief, and your love for them was real. And just as a general thing for you all to just keep in mind, if you ever find yourself saying the words at least and whatever comes after, try to stop yourself, try to pause, because that comment at least does create that minimizing experience, and people will often experience it as unhelpful. Another phrase you can hear is a person saying, hey, they lived a long life. You should be happy. And the problem with this is that it overlooks the person's current pain by only focusing on the positives. So instead, you can say something like, it sounds like you gave them such a beautiful life. Another thing people say, well-intentioned but not very helpful, is to be strong. Be strong for your kids. Be strong for your family. And the problem with this is that it pressures a person to hide their grief and it models emotional suppression. So that these kinds of feelings, that sadness, despair, anger, guilt, these are not acceptable feelings that can be talked about and expressed. These are things we have to keep to ourselves. And in this type of phrase of be strong for your kids or be strong for your family, it's modeling a way of living in the world where emotions are not seen and emotions are not heard. So instead, a better way of saying this is it's okay for your family, it's okay for your kids to see how much you loved your pet, to normalize, to allow kids to see it's okay to cry, it's okay to be angry. Finally, another thing you might hear is a person saying, don't be sad, they're in a better place now. And this can minimize the person's present feelings, and it also assumes a shared belief about afterlife. So instead, you can say something very simple, like, I can see how much you miss them. So as losses come up for you and you're working with people who are grieving, just try to keep in mind the things that come out of your mouth or thoughts that come up, because even though it's can be well intentioned, it may not always accurately get at what you're trying to say and can be misconstrued or feel invalidating. So one important thing I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the word dead or died is we have to consider a child's age, their development, because children understand different things at different ages, and death and dying is one of those things that can be very confusing for kids when they're younger. So let's talk about some age specific considerations. So when supporting children between the ages of 3 and 10 through pet loss, it's important to remember that their understanding of death is still concrete and literal. Young children often don't grasp the permanence of death. They can genuinely believe that pets can come back to life or that death is something that's reversible. So, because of this, euphemisms like the pet went to sleep or they ran away can actually cause confusion and even fear. A child might begin to worry about bedtime if they hear the pet went to sleep and didn't wake up. So it's far better to use simple, clear, honest language, like the word died, so the child understands. Common questions you may hear at this age include, when is my dog coming back? Or, can we visit the cat in heaven? These kinds of questions reflect their developmental stage. These are very common things you'll hear. And this shows that their abstract concepts like permanence or spirituality are still forming, still being worked out and understood. There's also magical thinking that's common in this age range. A child may start to believe that they did something or failed to do something that caused the death of their pet. For example, a child might say, I forgot to feed him once, so that's why he died. These kinds of beliefs can bring feelings of guilt or responsibility, which adults need to gently correct with reassurance that the death was not their fault. So, by understanding these developmental patterns, we can respond to children's grief with honesty, compassion, and reassurance. So, when it comes to supporting children ages 3 to 10, the most important thing we can do is provide clarity, reassurance, and stability. First, as always, we want to use simple, direct, and honest language. For example, if a child said, what happened to our dog? We can say something along the lines of, our dog died. A child might say, died? What does it mean that he died? They might not even know the word. So you can say, when a dog dies, it means their body stopped working. Very simple, very developmentally appropriate. We don't want to scare them. Then a child might say, well, will I see him again? And this is where they think death is reversible, it's not permanent. And this is where we need to say something like, when a dog dies, it means we won't see them again. And it's a time that we have to say goodbye. Very hard, very sad, but important. We also need to recognize that children often process grief symbolically rather than verbally. Encouraging them to express their feelings through play, through drawing, or storytelling allows them to make sense of the loss in ways that are natural for their developmental stage. It's also essential to reassure them repeatedly that the pet's death was not their fault. Children may blame themselves due to magical thinking, believing that something they did or failed to do caused the death. So we need to emphasize that adults made decisions out of love and care, and that the child is not to blame. Finally, we want to maintain consistency in daily routines. Consistency, stability, predictability, they help restore a sense of safety for a child. So when everything feels disrupted by loss, steady routines like mealtime, school, bedtime rituals, all of these things can provide comfort and stability. So we don't want to change the schedule during these periods of times as much as possible. Keep it the way it always was. So these strategies together can give children the clarity, reassurance, and support they need to navigate grief in a healthy way. As children move into adolescence, their understanding of death becomes more abstract. So let's look at tweens and teens, ages 11 to 18. Tweens and teens begin to grasp that death is final and irreversible. They can understand it like the way we do. And this can lead to deeper existential or spiritual questions. They might ask, do animals have souls? Or why do good creatures suffer? The death of a pet can spark broader reflections on injustice, mortality, and even their own developing identity. Their grief expressions often look very different from younger children's. Some may show irritability or withdrawal. They isolate themselves in their room or lash out at family members. Others may act out by engaging in risk-taking, defiance, or even academic struggles, and these are outlets for unexpressed emotions. So what can't be talked about is acted out. Another dynamic to watch for is over-identification. So some teens can minimize their grief in an attempt to appear more grown up, while others may become overwhelmed and completely immersed in their grief, where they feel unable to share openly. By understanding these patterns, it helps us respond with compassion rather than judgment. What might look like rebellion, disinterest, or overreaction is often just grief being expressed in ways that match their developmental style. So we want to make sure if a teenager's acting out or they're really difficult and defiant, we have to ask ourselves, are they really grappling with painful feelings inside? And this is how it's coming out. rather than just punish them and you know, not understand them. So when supporting tweens and teens, it's important to remember that their grief often looks different from what we expect. The first thing we can do is encourage peer support. Adolescents are often more comfortable sharing feelings with friends or in group settings than with adults. We can suggest things like group conversations, online memorial pages, or peer-led rituals, which can normalize their grief and give them a sense of belonging. Second, we need to validate mixed feelings. Teens may feel sadness one moment, anger the next, or even relief or guilt. Sometimes they feel numb altogether. Letting them know that these emotions can exist side by side and that none of them are wrong and they're actually quite normal can help reduce confusion or even shame they may feel about what they're feeling. Third, we want to give them healthy outlets for expression. Journaling, music, sports, art, or creating digital tributes like videos, slideshows, or even Instagram memorials can provide safe spaces for processing grief in ways that feel natural to them. Finally, it's important to model openness without forcing conversation. Teens may not always want to talk when we want them to talk, so the key is to give them space while also being available and approachable when they're ready. So, by showing that grief can be spoken about openly and that we're ready to listen, we can create an environment where they feel safe reaching out. So, you leave the door open and wait for them to walk through. So, when we think about family dynamics in grief, it's important to remember that adults and children grieve very differently. Adults may prefer to grieve quietly or privately, while children express grief in short bursts or through behavior like acting out, crying suddenly, or withdrawing. This mismatch between adults and children can create tension if parents expect children to grieve the same way they do. Sometimes adults try to protect children by avoiding discussions about the pet's death. And while this is well intentioned, the silence can actually increase confusion or even heighten anxiety for children, who may fill in the gaps with their own fears or misunderstandings. That's why the modeling of healthy grief expression is so important. Children learn how to grieve by watching adults. If adults are able to be honest about their sadness while also showing how they cope, whether that's through talking, storytelling, or creating rituals, children are more likely to feel safe expressing their own feelings. Simple acts like sharing stories about the pet, looking at photos together, or even crying openly as a family can demonstrate that grief is natural, that it's not something to hide or feel ashamed of. In this way, families create a safe, open environment for grief, which helps both children and adults move towards healing. Another important way families can support each other is through creating family rituals. Some families can hold a small memorial service at home, and this gives everyone, especially children and teens, a chance to share stories, light candles, or say goodbye in a meaningful way. It becomes a very intentional space that you set up. Others may create a family scrapbook or memory box, and this can include photos, drawings, the pet's collar, or written memories, and it becomes a tangible keepsake that can honor the bond and keep the pet's presence alive in the family story. Families can also establish annual traditions, like lighting a candle, baking a favorite treat, or telling stories on the pet's birthday or adoption day. These rituals give children and teens an ongoing way to honor the pet while also reinforcing that it's okay to remember and celebrate their life. What makes rituals powerful is that they provide a sense of inclusion, belonging, and continuity. They tell children and teens, your grief matters. You're part of the family story, and that we remember together. That shared acknowledgement helps them feel supported and connected, even in loss. So now let's move on to talking about euthanasia, which is a very, very challenging conversation. When preparing children for euthanasia of a pet, the most important thing is to be honest and age appropriate, as we've talked about. As mentioned, you want to avoid euphemisms like we're going to put the dog asleep or the pet went away. And while these phrases feel gentler, they can be confusing or frightening. For example, a child who hears they went to sleep and didn't wake up can start to feel anxious about bedtime. So, as we've talked about already, we want clear and direct language. So, what does that look like in the context of euthanasia? You can explain to a child by saying, the vet will give medicine that will stop the pet's name's body from working because he or she is very sick. And once the body stops working, they won't be in pain anymore. Very hard thing to say, but it's simple, it's truthful, and it's compassionate. It's also important to tailor explanation to the child's age and their developmental stage. So, as I mentioned, between in the earlier ages, 3 to 6, we want to keep it very, very simple. Only focus on what's necessary for them to understand. Between the ages of 7 and 10, you can provide slightly more detail, along with reassurance that they and their family members are safe and healthy, that it's not their fault. And then for tweens and teens, we can invite questions and acknowledge the complexity of the decision, including the ethical concerns they might bring up. So this validates their growing capacity for abstract thinking and moral reasoning. So by matching honesty with developmental sensitivity, we prepare children in a way that can reduce fear, that builds trust, and allows them to process the loss in a healthy way. So that the younger the child is, the more simple the explanation. And the older they get, the more we can be more clear, more direct, more honest about what's happening. So when preparing children for euthanasia, it's very important to set clear expectations so that the experience doesn't become frightening or confusing. First, we want to explain what they may see or experience if they choose to attend. We want to make it a choice. We want to let them know that their pet will likely be lying still, that the environment will be calm and peaceful, and that once the medicine is given, their pet's body will no longer move, will no longer breathe, and they will no longer feel pain. And this helps them understand what's happening in simple, concrete terms. Second, we want to prepare them for the emotions they might feel, and that can be sadness, confusion, or even uncertainty. It's also important to let them know that the adults present might cry, and that's okay too. Children need reassurance that it's normal to have different reactions in moments like this, and that it's okay to cry, to feel sad, or even not know what to feel at all. By setting these expectations for what they'll see and what they might feel, we can reduce fear and create space for children to process the experience in a safe and supportive way. And one of the most important principles in supporting children through euthanasia is empowering their sense of agency, as I mentioned just before. Children should never be forced to be present during the procedure, but they should be given the choice. Having the ability to decide for themselves helps them feel included in the process rather than shut down or powerless. They may choose to be in the room during the procedure, to say goodbye beforehand, or create something meaningful. That could be a drawing, a letter, or special object that can be placed with the pet if they decide not to be there. Even small choices like these can make a big difference. They allow children to participate in ways that feel right to them, and it helps reduce their sense of helplessness that can often come with grief. So, in this way, agency supports not only the child's immediate coping, but also their long term healthy grieving. As mentioned earlier, we have to also consider the importance of rituals. and they can be very important in the context of euthanasia as well. Some families may find meaning in lighting a candle, saying a prayer, or sharing stories about the pet before the appointment. And these small but intentional acts help create a sense of reverence and acknowledgement of the moment. Children, in particular, often benefit from having a role in these rituals, having some involvement. They may want to hold the pet's paw, whisper words of love into the pet's ear, or bring along a favorite toy or blanket to give to their pet for comfort. These types of rituals do more than mark the occasion. They help children experience a sense of closure. They can affirm that it's okay to grieve, that saying goodbye matters, and that their relationship with the pet is worthy of honor and remembrance. So this really challenges that disenfranchised grief feeling. We also have to be mindful of guilt and blame, as we've talked about so far. It's essential to reinforce that euthanasia is an act of love. Some children might fear it's a form of punishment. We need to reassure them clearly that we made this choice because we love our pet too much to let them keep hurting. This shift in focus from harm to compassion makes euthanasia about preventing suffering, not causing it. Second, it's important to clarify who makes the decision. Children should understand that the responsibility rests with the adults and the veterinarian. You can say something like, the grown-ups, along with the vet, made the decision because it's our job to take care of our pet. This removes the burden of responsibility from the child, who might otherwise believe that something they said or did or wished influenced this decision. And finally, we need to normalize mixed feelings. Children may feel sadness that their pet's gone, but also relief that their pet's pain has ended. These emotions can coexist and are both valid. Helping children understand that feeling relief does not mean they loved their pet any less allows them to grieve without shame or confusion. By enforcing, by reinforcing love, clarifying responsibility, and normalizing complex emotions, we help children move through this difficult experience with less guilt and greater healing. So after a pet has died, children benefit greatly from aftercare activities. So we really want to be mindful in the hours and days following a natural death or a euthanasia death. We want to encourage creative expression. Children may want to write goodbye letters to their pet, share love, memories, or even things they didn't get to say in those letters. Others can find comfort in drawing or painting pictures of their pet. And these are images that capture happy moments or their favorite memories. Another activity a child can do is a memory box. So this can include photos, the pet's favorite toy, their collar, and having something tangible to hold and revisit can help children feel connected to their pet's memory. As a family, you can also record favorite stories in a journal. These can be moments that everyone remembers, and that can include funny habits to sweet routines you shared with your pet. And this practice helps preserve the pet's presence in the family story and provides children with reassurance that it's okay to keep remembering and talking about their pet. This type of aftercare gives children outlets for their emotions. Children have a harder time talking about their feelings, so it expresses itself better through these types of outlets. And this helps prevent feelings from being bottled up, and it ensures that their grief is validated. In supporting children after the death of a pet, we want to help maintain a sense of connection as well. So, a reminder that the relationship doesn't end, it transforms into memory and meaning. Families can establish ongoing rituals like we talked about before. This can include lighting a candle on the anniversary of the pet's death, celebrating their birthday or adoption day, or telling remember when stories at dinner. These practices weave a pet's memory into the rhythm of family life. It's also valuable to involve children in final decisions in ways that match their developmental stage. Some children want to help choose between burial or cremation, to decide where to scatter the ashes, or participate in planning a memorial. Allowing them to take ownership and agency in this helps provide a sense of dignity and healing. So, together, these approaches honor the bond and help children integrate the loss. I also just wanted to share 3 resources I came across online for those dealing with pet loss. One is the Association for Pet Loss and Bereavement. The second is the Tufts University Pet Loss Support Hotline, and the number is there. And another resource is Lap of Love. So these are all resources you can share and check out that can expand upon the conversation we're having today. So as we come to the close of this presentation, I want to highlight some key takeaways. First, pet loss grief is profound and real. Pets are not just animals, they're family members and attachment figures. Their loss leaves a deep void in daily routines, in identity, and in emotional well-being. And it's important to recognize that grief over a pet is not less than grief for a human. It is its own valid and legitimate experience. Second, disenfranchised grief intensifies pain. When others minimize the loss, mourners may feel ashamed or isolated. The absence of societal rituals and formal acknowledgement, like funerals or bereavement leave, can make the grief heavier and harder to process. So one of the greatest gifts we can offer is simple validation. Third, children and teens need tailored, compassionate support. Young children think about death concretely and need clear, simple language as well as reassurance. Tweens and teens process grief abstractly and may need outlets through peers, creative expression, or digital memorials. Families play a crucial role by modeling healthy grief expression, showing children it's okay to cry, to remember, and to talk about their loss. Finally, rituals and validation are essential. Because pet loss often lacks formal rituals, creating personal or community ones can help acknowledge the loss, honor the bond, and integrate the pet's memory into the family story. With these key points in mind, I would open it up now to any questions or reflections that you may have as we close out this presentation. And then following the presentation, I will provide our short remembrance moments of our pets. Thank you.
Will follow, golden winds will blow, but I still Champagne skies through the water. I'll take